Chains of Reason podcast, where we link the chains of reason that affects our daily lives in society and culture, including, but not limited to, sports and politics.
Welcome back to the Chains of Reason podcast. I'm your host, DJ Grand, and I'm with my brother, Jerry.
Greetings.
And our producer, Ryan.
The architect podcaster, Ryan.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Very good. Today we're going to do our second part of our discussion on the Fountainhead, and this time we're going to be talking about the themes of the Fountainhead. Now, Ayn Rand, even though this really pisses the people off at the Ayn Rand Institute, she was a dialectical thinker. And I think the reason why it makes it so mad is they're anti-communist, and Karl Marx was a dialectical materialism thinker.
So they're actually comparing her because of that.
Well, they don't like it being said. And it was never said while she was alive. It came about, the first time I heard it was after she was dead.
What did she say?
She was from Russia. So
right.
She has to be influenced by that thinking. And German, Russian, especially in philosophy, there's dialectics. And dialectics is opposites. It's right, two things fighting for each other.
Right.
Okay? And so you have individualism versus collectivism. You have independence versus dependence. And this is what, in my interpretation of what the Fountain is, it's either thinking through other people's heads or thinking through your own heads. So the theme is basically those three aspects. Ayn Rand herself said when she was in her journals that the Fountainhead started in my mind as a new code of ethics. The morality of individualism. The idea of individualism is not new, but nobody has defined it in a consistent and specific way to live by it in practice. It is in their statements of morality that the individualist thinkings have floundered and lost their case. So the Fountainhead is that presentation of a new morality, the rational self-interest, or what Ayn Rand called in one of her philosophy books, the virtue of selfishness. This is what I love about Ayn Rand. What she does is she takes philosophical ideas and doesn't leave it concretized. She doesn't leave it in the abstract form. She concretizes it. She shows how this abstract is applicable in real world. Mm-hmm. If you read other philosophers, with the exception of maybe Nietzsche, because he was a little colorful in his storytelling, it was all dry. It was sort of like in Beetlejuice. It reads like stereo instructions.
Yeah.
It's really boring, especially epistemology. I mean, it's so dry and boring. Ayn Rand isn't like that. And that's why the academics hate her, because she's never or very rarely recognized in academia. She didn't do it the normal way. She was the Howard Rourke of the thinkers. She did it her own way. She did it by presenting ideas on how her philosophy works in real life. And that's why I absolutely love Ayn Rand. Especially when you study philosophy, you see that she is so different from the others in just how she presented her ideas and then the ideas themselves. One of the great innovative aspects of Ayn Rand is that she presented her ideas in not a dry philosophical treatises, which is what I was basically just talking about. It was not presented in an abstract form. She's shown what it means to live by certain principles, individualism or collectivism or selfishness or selflessness. Ethics is a code of value that guides mankind's choices and actions. And each character in the Fountainhead, as I went over in the last subject, lives by a certain morality, a certain code of choices and actions. For the most part, Howard Rourke is the only consistent selfish character. And by selfish, I need to define this. He thought through his own head. He selfishly was independent, and he wanted his own work for his own pursuit of happiness. All the other characters are flawed in some way. Peter Keating is totally flawed because he just has no self. Gil Winan, he's flawed in the fact that he thinks through other people by pandering to them, thinking he has power. Ellsworth, go ahead, Jerry, you going to say something?
No.
Ellsworth Toohey is flawed because he's evil and wants to bring the mediocre down and bring the mediocre up and bring in the creative independent man down. And he does that because he cares what other people think. And Dominique is the only one in the story who actually is has some sort of redemption because she corrects her flaw. She ends up seeing at the end that, and she tells Rourke after he's arrested and he's about to go on trial for the Cortland Homes, for blowing up the Cortland Homes. She tells him that no matter what they do to you, if they put you in jail, I'll come visit you. It doesn't matter now. She put away all that worrying about what other people think or thought and was concerned about her own head for the first time. She's the only redemptive character, and Howard Rourke is the only consistent character throughout the entire book. Now, The Fountainhead presents a new kind of selfishness. In Rourke's courtroom speech, and I recommend you to read that courtroom speech, because in Rourke's courtroom speech, Ayn Rand is defining what she means by individualism versus collectivism, and what it means to be an individualist and what it means to be a collectivist. I highly recommend reading that courtroom speech in its entirety. If you don't read anything else, read the courtroom speech. In that courtroom speech, Rourke says, all that which proceeds from man's independent ego is good. All that which proceeds from man's dependence on other men is evil. This country is not based on selfless service, sacrifice, renunciation, or any precept of altruism. It is based on man's right to the pursuit of happiness. And there we go again with that. Not anyone else's, a private, personal, selfish motive. That pursuit of happiness, in order to have that, that is an individual function. You cannot force someone to be happy. They have to do it for themselves and by themselves. The traditional or conventional definition of selfishness is concerned with one's own interest. Well, that's fine, but that doesn't say if your interests are bad or good. It doesn't define it good enough to help you out. Because you could be concerned with your own interest like Gail Wyman was and use it to pander and get the mob to make you money.
Correct. But I think with the people, I'll go the other direction, and they don't like that kind of thinking, because the ones that can't take care of themselves, I don't want to say that the handicap, because
no, it's called the dependents, because it's either independent or dependent.
Correct.
Those people are dependent.
The one that are dependent, they can't take care of themselves. A special needs child that grows into an adult. That kind of thinking, it's kind of heartless. The other side, that's what they're thinking. It's cold because someone's got to take care of them. And with that thinking, that's not going to happen.
Well, wait a minute now. We brought this up in the last podcast when we were talking about, when I asked Ryan about choosing between a potential baby, and a video game that he loved. If you have this special needs child, or if you know a special needs child, if you value that human life more than you value your $100, whatever, it is not a sacrifice.
No, they're not talking about that. This special needs, they can't afford it now. So now they're going out to others that they have to help and if you say no, you're cold.
Well,
you're not thinking of them, and you're being.
No, you're right. According to that definition of selfish,
correct.
Yes. However, what I'm trying to say, based on a proper value, you can help them out if it's not forced. Well, not just forced. If you're not giving up a greater value for a lesser value. If that helping that person out is a greater value to you than the money you have, then there's nothing wrong with helping them out and giving your money to them. And I don't care if it's through a charity or it's through your own personal pocket. I don't necessarily think it should come from the government, because that's forced. Right. As long as it's done through individual choice, that you can be very selfish and help someone out. It depends on your values.
But if you watch the commercials right now for president, I mean, this one commercial is about a special needs child, and what is President Trump going to do for my child to go on to take care of her for her special needs. And that's what I'm getting at. These people do not want the independent.
Well, the flaw in that thinking right there is the premise. And the premise is that the government should help you out. But the problem with the government helping you out is it's done by force. It's not done by voluntary trade. When you take taxes from someone by force and give it to a special needs child, that is immoral. Is taken by force. Now, if you help them, that special needs child, because you value human life then there's nothing immoral about that whatsoever. So long as it's done consistent with your values.
I completely agree.
So authentic selfishness does not involve exploiting other people. Notice that the conventional selfishness is what you basically think that Peter Keating was, is he exploits other people. He uses other people to get ahead in life. Gil Winan exploits other people. He panders to the masses to get ahead in life.
For his own gains.
For his own gain. The same can be said of Ellsworth Toohey. He uses altruism as a tool to exploit other people so that he can get ahead in life. True, authentic selfishness does not involve exploiting other people. Selfishness is above using others in any manner whatsoever. Authentic selfishness, rational selfishness, is living independently for one's own happiness, not being dependent on others in any exploitative way. And that is the operative word, exploitative way. Because if you do it through the government, like you're saying with the subnormal children,
you're exploiting them, right? Yeah.
It's like exploitation.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it based on values, then
through charities, GoFundMe pages, yeah, correct.
And you do it yourself voluntarily because you value that. That is being selfish because you're aligning with your values and you're thinking through your own head. Selfishness is living primarily. Selflessness is living primarily for the sake of others and sacrificing one's own interest to that of others. Selflessness as an ideal is a vicious form of self-destruction. And that is what I talked about in the last podcast, is the character of Catherine Halsey. She ends up becoming a bitter social worker, just lashing out at the people she's working with because her life has turned out the exact opposite of what she thought it was going to be. I mean, that is, when I say selflessness as an ideal is a vicious form of self-destruction, that is the concretized version of it. And that's why Ayn Rand presented that character. The problem with altruism, and we're talking about in this, one of the themes of this, or one of the dialecticals is, well, not dialectics, is egoism versus altruism. Egoism is thinking for yourself. Altruism is sacrificing yourself.
Thinking of others.
But that presents a moral false alternative. You either have to sacrifice others to ourselves, or sacrifice ourselves to others. This is also from Rourke's courtroom speech. This notion ties man irrevocably to other men and left him nothing but a choice of pain. His own pain borne for the sake of others, or pain inflicted upon others for the sake of self. Man was forced to accept masochism as his ideal under the threat that sadism was his only alternative. The choice is not self-sacrifice or domination. The choice is independence or dependence. So that takes care of the independence versus the dependence theme, or the start of it. I want to also talk about individualism versus collectivism, because like I said at the beginning of the last podcast, Ayn Rand said that the theme of the Fountainhead was individual versus collectivism, but not in politics, but inside a man's soul. Politics, most people can't define it, just like they can't define morality, is how we deal with other people. Ayn Rand's talking about inside yourself. Individual or collectivism inside yourself. And I've already gone over all the collectivists. Peter Keating has to trample on other people and think through other people just to get his values. Gil Winan has to pander. Ellsworth Toohey has to use other people to try and to collect souls. Yeah. All of them are forms of collectivism, which is dependence. Were you gonna say something?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Rourke lives by individualism, while Keating and Winan and Toohey live by collectivism. The Manhattan Bank building, which I brought up last time, Rourke seems selfish and willing to sacrifice money and work for his integrity. Actually, he himself thinks it's the most selfish thing and says so. Because as I brought up in the last podcast, the guy on the board of directors said, why are you being so selfless? Why are you sacrificing for the sake of your integrity? But he's not. He's doing it for the sake of his work because he wants to do his work his way.
But the common thought is just that, because where I work, the presidents, senior vice presidents, the first thing in their morning meeting when they want to talk to all the buildings at once is, what can you do for others today? What can you do for others to make their life better? Now, we take care of seniors.
Do you know what you can do? Think for yourself.
That would be against the rules.
No, it can't be. It can't be. Because in order, and this is why it can't be, or it's a contradiction. In order to think for others, you must first think.
We have a
You know,
zero
think for
tol-
yourself, your own head, and then think of others.
We have a zero tolerance for egos in politics.
It's impossible. That's absolutely. First of all, the only way you cannot have politics, by definition, is if you're on a desert island with nobody else around. Because then,
how you treat people,
remember I said I defined it, that it's how we treat other people.
Yeah.
Well, if you have no other people, then you have no politics. That's if you're exists with people in society, you have to be political.
You're going to have politics.
So what those people are telling you is be contradictive. Because I want you to live, but I don't want you to live the way you think you
My
should
point
live.
of bringing that up was that's a predominant way of thinking now in corporate America.
Well, I think that's the point of why Ayn Rand wrote The Fountainhead. She was trying to take a concept that was wrongly presented. I think it was damaged.
Trying to fix it. Right?
Yeah, I think it was damaged some by religion, because religion says if you're selfish, you're evil. Some by that,
must sacrifice.
some by philosophy, because a lot of philosophers, like Immanuel Kant, says you have to work out of moral duty, and then it means nothing to yourself.
Yeah.
A duty means it's against morality. If you have a duty, there's no choice. There's no choice. There's no morality.
Yeah.
So the point is that you, at least in what you bring up, you have to think for yourself. In order to get anything done, in order to give a benefit to someone else, it first has to be created. In order to be created, it has to be thought by one person first.
Yeah.
And even this is why I think that courtroom speech is so great. Even in if there's no such thing as a collective thought. If you eat in a cafeteria, you're eating together, but each person has to digest it individually. That's the same with thinking.
Eat at their own pace.
Yes.
They eat what they want.
But
their
no, it
choice.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Each person has to think it has to think individually, has to eat individually.
In order to, yes, consume. Correct.
What altruism does is tell you to go against your nature.
Basically, don't eat, give it to somebody else.
I'm glad you brought that
You
up.
would die.
Here's why. This is a good example of why you cannot be consistent with altruism. Because if you were totally altruistic, totally sacrificing all the time, that one morsel of food that you're eating, one morsel, let alone a
Somebody else
meal,
could
could go to someone else. You could sacrifice that for someone else. And if you did that consistently, like I said, it can't be practiced consistently, you would die. And not only would you die, the entire human race would die if they practiced it consistently.
If they practiced that, correct.
So therefore, altruism is evil and cannot be practiced
The
consistently.
last person wouldn't, because there's no one to give the food to, so he'd be all right.
Yeah, but he'd be in a state of starvation, but I guess if he made it that long, I guess you're right. In Rourke's courtroom speech, he says the basic need of a creator is independence. The reasoning mind cannot work under any form of compulsion. It cannot be curbed, sacrificed, or subordinated in any consideration whatsoever. It demands total independence in function and motive. Later, he says, the independent man does not exist for any other man and asks no other man to exist for him, which is kind of like the same thing in Atlas Shrugged. If you remember, if you read Atlas Shrugged, the great motto of Atlas Shrugged is, I will not live for the sake of another man, nor will I ask another man to live for mine. That's part of that motto. And that's exactly the same here. It's, I will not exist for another man. Toohey preaches collectivism, altruism, unselfishness, and sacrifice for the sake of others. Like I said earlier, producing goods has to be and is the primary. The beneficiary of those goods is the secondary. It must first come through a thinking individual. Something has to first be produced or created before it can be given to others. See, the individual mind has to be primary. And even Ayn Rand says it in the courtroom speech. There's no such thing as a collective soul. There's only individual souls. The real motive of the preachers of altruism, like Toohey, it's not to help the needy who are dependent, but is to keep down those who don't need any help. The individualism, the independence, and isn't that exactly what Toohey does by trying to prop up Keating? He's trying to knock down Howard Rourke. That's why Ayn Rand was a genius. She just presented these ideas in such great detail in a dramatic novel that it's beautiful, and I love the way she did it.
Do you think she like faced a lot of these kind of things? She must have in her life.
Well, she was born in communist Russia.
Okay.
She said one of her first memories growing up was seeing the masses. I think it was St. Petersburg, but I could get the city wrong. But seeing the masses all go for communism, and I think she didn't think the way the others did, so she was basically one of the ones that got purged out of university. And it wasn't until she came to the United States where she really could blossom and use her mind.
Yeah.
I mean, she was fortunate. When she came to the United States, she was fortunate to have relatives here to get the visa to come here. And then she went to Hollywood. And I don't know if it's by luck or if it's destiny. I don't believe in either. But she met up with Cecil B. DeMille, and she got to be an extra in The King of Kings, and she ended up becoming a screenwriter or working to correcting the screen.
Right place, right time.
Yes, exactly. I think maybe it was meant to be.
That's how it works.
Toohey then is the arch representative of altruism and collectivism, and keening and whining are variations on that theme. Toohey and the altruist proponents want power to rule over men. Altruism is a means of acquiring that power to rule over men. Toohey says this to Keating when he was breaking down Keating and trying to get him to confess on who actually designed Cortlandt. He says, preach altruism. Tell men he must live for others. Tell men that altruism is the ideal. Not a single one has ever achieved it, and not a single one of them ever will. Later he says, man realizes that when he accepted as a noblest virtue, it gives him a sense of guilt, of sin, of his own basic unworthiness. Later he says to Keating, don't allow men to be happy. Happiness is self-contained and self-sufficient. Bring them to a state where they say, I want is no longer a natural right, but a shameful admission. Altruism is a great help in this. And altruism is a means to kill the individual spirit. Men with no individual spirit are ripe to be led by someone else. Winan seeks power over other men by using his will against theirs to break men's integrity because his lack of integrity, which I said is Nietzsche. Toohey uses other men's integrity against themselves, which is Kant. And Winan fights men's integrity. Toohey uses men's integrity to destroy themselves. You want to say something?
No, I was just agreeing with you on what you're saying.
Okay. Well, I want to round this out by reading just the first paragraph of Wort's courtroom speech. I just love the way he presented it, or Ayn Rand presents it. He starts out saying, 1,000 years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burnt at the stake he was taught his brothers to light. He was considered an evildoer who had dealt with a demon mankind dreaded. But thereafter men had fire to keep them warm, to cook their food, and to light their caves. He had left them a gift they had not conceived and lifted darkness off the earth. Centuries later, the first man invented the wheel. He was probably torn on the rack he had taught his brothers to build. He is considered a transgressor who ventured into forbidden territory. But thereafter, men could travel past any horizon. He had left them a gift they had not conceived, and he had now opened the roads of the world. I think that is an awesome way to say that the individual has been punished throughout the entire history of mankind, yet it's the individual thought that has caused man to progress.
Yeah. There's this one thing I wanted to say about this that was interesting that you wanted to do this for a podcast episode is I'm going to see a comedian tomorrow, Ari Shafir, and I listen to his podcast and stuff like that. And he probably read this book like 3 years ago or something, but brought it into how he goes into like he really believes in the whole Rourke thing and individualism. And he's after he read this book, he was just saying how much it helped him with his stand up and all that. And I just thought it was funny that when I asked you, I texted you today. I'm like, what are you guys talking about? You brought this up, and I'm going to see him tomorrow. He doesn't come around Michigan too much, so I was like, good chance to see him. So I just thought it was ironic that you brought this up, and like tomorrow night I'm going to see him, and he. Even in his Netflix special at the very end of the credits, he thanks this book, not like all Ayn Rand, just the Fountainhead. So I just thought it was
some people
funny.
think Fountainhead's better than Atlas Shrugged. I mean,
Yeah.
it is a great book. I can't recommend it enough. It's complex, but if you read just a chapter a night,
Yeah.
you'll get through it in a couple months, and I guarantee you'll be better for it. You'll
Yeah.
learn a lot. It's a very deep book. It's not one of those books that you just read and forget about.
Oh, definitely not. No.
It's a deep book. Jerry, you got anything left to say?
No, you said well.
Who was that before I closed
Ari
that?
Shafir. He's on like Joe Rogan and stuff like that. He's
I've heard of him.
Yeah.
So I have to check him out then, because
Yeah.
if you like Ayn Rand, there must be something good about him.
Yeah. He really. And again,
Pretty
it was
funny.
the Fountainhead.
He's a
So
funny
yeah.
So that's great. Well, you've been listening to the Chains of Reason podcast. Once again, you can get a hold of us at our website at chainsofreasonpodcast.com. Click on the contact us. You'll get our email address, and you can click on our social media. You've been listening to the Chains of Reason podcast. How can anyone be enlightened when the truth is so poorly lit?